Contact left!
What did I war in war? Having been in 3 different wars, I've learned quite a bit on what is important gear and what is not important gear. And the first one is a backpack, specifically North Face. This is one of them that I've brought into combat operations before. It's even got the scars to prove it. I think this one was in Iraq as well. I don't know, I've had about 3 of them. So a black North Face backpack was one of the things that I brought in every war zone that I've been in. Not only is it inconspicuous, I think that's the word, when you're crossing borders, not so legally, and you're getting through checkpoints, you don't have Molly and camouflage on it, but it's a well-known brand and it's durable. I've only had 1 strap break on me, but that's because I was in Syria as a PKM gunner. So let's talk about Syria first. Coming to Syria was very risky, especially in 2018, and I wasn't able to bring everything that I wished I could have. I had a lot of stuff left over from the Marine Corps I could have brought, like my camouflage and other things, but basically what I was able to bring with me was a pair of boots, steel-toed boots, some power banks and a GoPro, this exact one, a Hero 7 Black. I still remember the day that I bought it. It's all scratched up now, but it's durable, and the footage is great. But other than that, I brought a camelback, a headlamp, some pain meds, even kitchen scissors, because I didn't know if there's gonna be trauma scissors there. And one of the best tools I brought with me to every single war zone as well was a Leatherman rebar, always in tan. But even then, I was never able to leave with that Leatherman, either because it was stolen or because it broke. A lot of times I'd lend it to somebody and they try and pry open something with the knife and it would snap, and yeah. But nonetheless, I like the form factor of it, and I was able to keep it on my side. That's how I had it in all the war zones. Always kept the Leatherman on my side. What else did I bring? I brought socks, brought waterproof bags, some 550 cord, a tourniquet. Now, as soon as I arrived, we were issued a uniform. That was like the first thing we got. So it felt cool to be in uniform again until the freezing rain came and we tried to go and dry it off on a heater. We found out it was made out of plastic. When we'd hold it up to the heater too close, it would burn away the fibers, which were just plastic fibers, and it would have this weird crusted over black sludge that was just the melted fabric. So it wasn't the best uniform. Definitely not fire retardant like the Marine Corps uniforms. Other than that, let's talk about what I wore when I was in the unit. Well, there's a lot of stories behind how I acquired the gear, but all in all, I wanted to press myself into the PKM role because I was one of the only guys with military experience and I understood a little bit of the fundamentals of being a machine gunner. Normally for machine gunners, especially team leads, they will have a pistol as a sidearm. We didn't have any pistols there. We had an AKM. So I carried with me, in the same North Face you saw, an AKM 7.62 by 39, a great rifle. It was Russian and operated great. The last user who gave it to me, he spent 500 rounds on his last operation and never once did a jam. So that was pretty cool. And I needed a sidearm. What if the PKM goes down? What if there's a hot barrel situation, a runaway gun? I gotta have something that I can grab real quick, especially because the operations that we would be going on was just gonna be a couple guys on a rooftop and anything could happen. Plenty of stories of ISIS assaulting the building that you're in. Now, what did I carry as a PKM gunner? Well, I had to have a plate carrier as well as a helmet, which we had to pick and choose from the armory. There wasn't anything too great in there. It was all airsoft vests, stuff that was very well worn, and to be honest, it was mostly just 550 cord. That was my plate carrier. I think it was about 20 strands of 550 that I had to sew onto the plate carrier to be able to carry the plates, not fall off my back. And I had quite the bulky setup, especially because my only experience with military before this was in the Marine Corps. And in the Marine Corps, we had very bulky gear. So I kept a couple magazines to the front of me. I had my IFAK on my right side. I had my kitchen scissors up front and tourniquets everywhere. I had them on my ankle, I had them on my strap, everywhere possible. And I had my helmet. And you might be asking about the plates. I have no idea what plates those were. I think they were manufactured in some weird warehouse in the middle of Syria. It was steel. That's all I know. I'm sure it would stop something because they were heavy as shit. And I had a couple frag pouches as well. But for myself personally, I don't like having a battle belt. A lot of people put a lot of that gear, IFAK and stuff like that, on their battle belt. But for me, being so small, the plate carrier kind of runs pretty low. It starts to get kind of crowded down there. So I wanted to have that mobility, which meant I needed to keep everything on my shoulders. It hurt. Add on to that, inside my North Face backpack, I had to carry 400 to 500 rounds of PKM ammunition. That is 7.62 by 54. Those are big rounds, very heavy rounds. And because of that, the boot bands came in handy. As you can expect, a North Face, no matter how durable, it's not meant for combat. Not meant for carrying 500 rounds of PKM ammunition. So one of the straps broke. So I used the boot band to go and fix it, which was kind of cool. It was smart. I was glad I brought the boot bands. And added on to the ammunition I had in there, I had to have AKM ammunition as well, which I at first kept in my front in the magazine pouches, but then because I wanted to be slick when I'm in the prone firing the PKM, I decided to go and put it inside my backpack. 3 to 4 magazines in my backpack, as well as my camelback attached to the back of my plate carrier. Yeah, there's a lot going on. It's pretty standard though. No night vision, nothing too crazy, but very, very heavy. And especially for the diet we were on, wow. I don't know how I was able to carry that. I came back home skin and bones. Now this brings us into Iraq, where I was in tunnel rat now. Finally, a war that was made for small dudes like me. In Iraq, I had every role possible. I actually started off as the Recon Sukazji, which meant I had a Dragunov. But unfortunately, the scope that we had wasn't the greatest. Somebody had dropped it and it wasn't able to hold a 0. So I decided to take it off and just use the Dragunov iron sights. So starting off there, I was originally going to go with the YPG setup before I really got accustomed to the tunnels, because that's what I learned in the Marine Corps and the YPG. I need to have armor. But about a month or two into Iraq, I found out that our armor was not on ourselves. It was the mountain that we were hiding underneath. So I didn't need to have all this armor on me. A helmet, sure, that's good for blast, is good for, not hitting your head on the rock walls above you. So I quickly transitioned to having a Kurdish rack, which is just a regular patrol vest, no armor whatsoever except for a helmet that was given to me, tactically acquired by my friends who wanted to go and help me out, which is cool. And on this rack, I had a couple magazine pouches and a couple frag pouches. So I was able to carry about 2 frags with me, about 3 mags as well. And that's all you really needed. We were guerrilla soldiers, tunnel rats. We weren't supposed to occupy a position for a very long time. It was a shoot and scoot situation. That was our whole thing. And again, because I was the recon guy, my job was, if we were expecting there were soldiers on top of our base, instead of having everybody exit the tunnels, attract a lot of attention from the drones that were above 24/7, the Biroctars, we would just have one guy, me, go out there with a Dragunov and an AK, and on top of my uniform, which was better than the YPG one. I didn't mention that. It was a lot better. I put over me a anti-thermal uniform. It was pretty sick. It was a weird material, kind of felt like an umbrella material. It was waterproof. And the hat that kind of kept it all together was a sombrero that they had tied all the fabric to. It was kind of funny. And the fabric draped over my eyes, and it had a little slit like this that kind of folded over every once in a while. It was definitely weird, but probably effective. But that was only the beginning. After a while, I started getting into different roles. I became a Dushka gunner after taking the Dushka course for a month. I was also a medic for a portion of the time. I was the IED guy, the guy who was going to blast the IEDs, and I was a team leader, a squad leader. I did everything. So I needed to have a kit that was pretty downgraded. I needed to be able to operate any weapon system quickly and not be overburdened by this weird camouflage setup. I transitioned away from the Sukaz role into these other roles. So my final setup there was a helmet if there was expected bombing. If not, just a boonie cover, which breaks up your silhouette at nighttime, or if you're skylining yourself. And I had the same Kurdish rack. I would change up the camouflage every once in a while. We got a couple different sets. A fake Marpat Chinese one. I had this weird desert camouflage, as well as a completely black one, which I think was cool, especially for the tunnels. It was like the only time that black camouflage made sense. Our armory situation, it was very rough. The sights in the RPK were broken. Our AKs were all janky. Some of them had weird stocks or no stocks at all. And the ammunition we had didn't help. One day while I was training the new recon guy on the Dragunov, we're using steel-tipped ammunition, and I didn't know this. There's a little bit too much pressure that happens when you fire it inside a Dragunov, and the casing got stuck in the barrel. We tried heating it up with a blowtorch. We tried banging against walls with a long metal rod, but nothing worked. That thing was trash. So I went for an AKM, 7.62 by 39. That's pretty much what every guerrilla force uses because it's so cheap and plentiful. And it was a nice one. I forget the exact origin, but I think it was Romanian. Never jammed on me. It was sighted in perfectly. I really love that rifle. And again, on my rack, I have the magazine pouches, I had the frag pouches, and I added on a couple things. I had the Leatherman on my side connected to my belt. I had a Camelback as well, which I tactically acquired. It was a crazy story. Can't really go into it right now, but I had a Camelback, which I would wear with me if I'm doing long movements in the tunnels, and the dump pouch. Every soldier needs a dump pouch, whether it's to carry empty magazines or to carry water or snacks, but there's no dump pouches that exist in Shengal. There's none. So you have to make it yourself. But it's pretty easy. I just found an RPG bag and some rubble pile that was nearby, a destroyed RPG bag, and I cut off one of the pockets of it and I tied it with 550 cord to my rack. That was my dump pouch for the year that I was living in the tunnels. It worked really well. And it was during that time, living in the tunnels, which were very dark, sometimes no electricity most of the time, that I learned a headlamp isn't always the best thing to have. Especially because if somebody's entering the tunnels, they're going to see the headlamp light and they're going to shoot at that, and then you don't. So you want to have that flashlight attached to your rifle so that way you can blind fire or whatever you need, and you can turn off really quickly just by activating with your thumb. So that's when I started taping my flashlight to my rifle. And that brings us into the IFAC. Instead of having it attached to my Kurdish rack, which could get bulky, it could get annoying, instead of getting a battle belt, which I already said I don't really like, what I did was there's this big camouflage pouch that was just big enough to carry everything I needed, but I didn't have any place to strap it. So I got 550 cord and I made a loop with it. That way it's kind of like it's like a purse, an IFAC purse. And of course, if you're running, the purse is gonna be flying everywhere. So I also had a carabiner, which I would keep on the side. This is another portion of being a tunnel rat, is you always have to be ready to rappel. We would train for rappelling all the time because we have to be the masters of the mountain. We have to be able to evade and get to places very quickly. So it was already mandatory for us to have a carabiner on us at all times. So why not use it to clip my IFAC to my belt? Added on to this, like, we're not wearing the rack all the time. You know, a lot of times we just carry our rifle with one magazine magazine. And for a lot of the guys, they wouldn't have an IFAK with them if they're outside under drone threat. It's very dangerous. But for me, I was able to have my IFAK strapped to me all the time. It wasn't attached to my plate carrier. It wasn't attached to a battle belt. It was a part of me, and I could just sling it on, sling it off as I wished. I really like that part. I definitely recommend that. And again, with the Leatherman, I had on my left side. That way I could fix the Dushka if I was the Dushka gunner, or I could prep some of the bombs with the wire cutters. I was pretty much a walking mechanic. Let's talk about Ukraine. Well, Ukraine, a lot of stories with the gear. You know, I've talked about it in a video before, but I carried all the lessons that I have from the Marine Corps, from the YPG, from Iraq, into Ukraine with me. And Ukraine being a standard land war, I needed to be a little bit more protected than I was in Iraq, where we had the tunnels as the armor, like I said. But unfortunately, at the beginning of the war, I didn't have the best gear. All the gear that I had was pretty much given to me, except for my first operation, where I brought some airsoft gear from Iraq because I knew I was going to Ukraine, and I didn't know what they had there. Yeah, my first operation, I wore some pretty crazy stuff. Made a whole video about that. Definitely recommend watching it. But other than that, most of my operations, I ran with a pretty nice plate carrier. It was given to me by SBU when I was working with them, but the plates weren't the best. It was not steel plates, so it wasn't heavy, but it was level 3s. It wasn't gonna be able to stop a rifle bullet most of the time. As well as I didn't have any soft armor or side sappies. I wasn't very protected. But I did get a nice Kevlar helmet donated to me. It was like a 2004 Mitch helmet, but it works. And we had a lot of options for weaponry, but I always leaned towards the AK systems. I always ran an AK, either an AKM or an AK-74. And in Ukraine, it was always AK-74. And of course, I strapped the light to it with tape. At the beginning of the war in Ukraine, I was mostly recon, which meant we were gonna be out there for a couple days possibly. So I had to have some sort of pack with me, which was this exact backpack. Yeah, I could still smell Ukraine in it, which I had extra frags with, I had magazines, I had all sorts of gear that you'd need, a typical sustainment load for a couple days. But as for what I wore, it changed a lot. I've switched plate carriers probably 4 times there. My plates as well. I went from level 3 to steel to level 4 shell bag. I was able to progress myself. So let's talk about my final setup. As a drone operator, granted, but my final setup. Of course, I had a Leatherman. A Leatherman should be required for every soldier. It is massively important. And I had it on my side as always. That way I could just bring it out nice and easy, cut things open when we're being watched by drones. And for my plate carrier, I think it was Spirit Systems. I'm pretty sure. I swapped it a couple times, but it was lightweight. I had some level 4s on the side as well, side sappies. But even then, with the level 4 surrounding my body, I was pretty slick compared to a lot of the guys. A lot of the guys wore neck armor or shoulder armor or even thigh armoring. But for myself, I had my helmets, which was the same helmet that I had at the beginning of the war. I had my vest with the armor, as well as a groin protector. $30. Kevlar, level 2. It was standard issue for the British Army for a while. Well, I bought like 10 of them, so I was able to donate it to some of the guys back in the day. And then when it came time for me to go on combat operations once again in 2024, I decided to wear one. I ended up tying it to the back of my plate carrier, so that way I was still slick. I didn't always have to have it on, but for infills and exfills, you want to protect the groin. So that was a very neat addition, and I definitely recommend it. It's super cheap, it doesn't deny you too much mobility, but again in Ukraine, you shouldn't be prioritizing mobility in most jobs. I had the tourniquets all around my body. I used to keep them in my ankle, but because in Ukraine there's a lot of mines, you don't want to rely on a tourniquet on your ankle. It could be blown up with your leg. So I decided to go mostly all up in the torso area. I kept about 3 or 4 within visible range. And what did I do with the IFAK? Well, I was able to find a side pouch a lot of people used in the rear for their identification, their phone, their passport, whatever it is. Well, I found out that I could keep everything that I need for an IFAK. Some gauze, chest seals, needle D, trauma scissors inside this little tiny pouch. It was tight, but it worked. And that way I was able to take it on and off very easily. I wasn't attached to my plate carrier where I need to not even have visual sight on it and just kind of where's my gauze? I was able to get it out in front of me if I needed it. So that was pretty cool. But again, it was the same idea that I had in Iraq. I also had my uniforms, which most of them were hand-me-downs or given to me by my friend. And on the plate carrier, although we're drone operators, we do have to be ready to engage the enemy. If they're saboteurs or a drone, you gotta shoot down drones. I've done it before. So on my vest, I had a couple magazine pouches and I had a couple frags with me too, M67s usually. And of course I had my main pack because you have to have a sustainment load enough for at least a week, maybe 10 days. So you have to have water and food and power banks and batteries and everything under the sun, anything you can think of. If you're going on a camping trip, I probably had it. Sleeping bag, baby sack, all that stuff. And that is about it. You know, if there's anything that I missed, you can see it in the videos, but that's generally how everything evolved. I learned a lot of lessons throughout the wars that I was in, and the big lesson was that I accustomed to myself to the war that I was in. That's the most important thing. I went from a rifleman in the Marine Corps to a PKM gunner in Syria, from a tunnel rat that was a Dushka gunner and team leader and medic, to an assault guy, to recon, to drone operator. I went to a lot of different things, and I never once had the same kit. And that was for a reason. No matter how helpful it was in Syria, it was not always gonna be helpful out here. Does it make sense? I hope it does. Yeah, that's what I wore in war. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.